When we ran this ad in Fishing World, I was a little bit surprised that so many people rang up and spoke to me on the phone, and it seemed as if they thought I'd have been long dead. Well, unfortunately, Ron's the one that's been not long dead, and when I visited him last year, he actually said to me, "Hey Oz, I've been reading in a book about a man who said that the massive men lead lives of quiet desperation. That's not you or me, is it?" Well, it certainly wasn't Ron. It probably wasn't me either. And he got some of his enthusiasm and excitement for fishing across in the films we made for the ABC, and these are the ones that you're going to see now. I do hope you enjoy them.
Imagine an island far out in the clean, blue waters of the Pacific, where population control has always been a fact of life and where pollution is unknown. A place so unspoiled you can actually walk down a beach and have the fish come to the edge to meet you. Fishing has never been allowed on this beach, and as a result of this, the fish are completely fearless. The location is Rord Howe Island, due east of Port Macquarie, a reminder of the way our whole east coast must have been once upon a time. These fish are a mixture of species. Some we've all seen feeding before, but others are rarely seen up close. The mullet, outrageously aggressive finger biters, are common enough hand feeders, but rarely this fearless. Big trevally like this are a different proposition though, and so are these big silver drummer, finger biters extraordinaire. These beautiful parrotfish are a little more shy, but still brazen by the standards we apply to more accessible waters. The whole place pulses with marine life of one kind or another, and all mainland fishermen, seeing them for the first time, have big problems with the idea that these big silvers are simply not fished for. Looking at fish is fine for a while, but too much looking has a predictable effect on a bloke like Steve Starling. And Rod Harrison looks about ready to roll. The gear is aboard our boat Santara to handle anything the island can offer. And with a bit of luck, even I might get to use some of it in between chores as soundman and still photographer. This particular day, building wind and a bad sea out wide dictated that we hug the base of the mountains and fish the inshore grounds. What are you burling with, Jim, at this stage?
A bit of squid with this here, I just cut up.
A bit of squid. You got a hook up, Steve?
Yeah.
Right outside the lagoon reef, we found our first lightweight action.
Yeah.
These bluefish are a first cousin to the East Coast blackfish. A truly beautiful little fish to look at. They're also a popular item on the island menu.
Oh, they've gone down quick tonight.
Might be something bigger having a look at them, eh?
Might be a nightmare fish.
Nightmare fish. The kingfish bite gets underway right outside the reef. And not all the fish found over the shallows are small like this one. Salmon are another common fish around the island at times, but this little fellow was just a loner. Paul Beaumont, skipper of Santara, demonstrates the adjustment mainland fishermen have to make before they can start to do well around the island. Even the small fish are eating bait this size, and to be thinking right, you need to be thinking big. In the few hours we fished this first morning, the weather went from bad to abominable, and then it went to something even worse than that. But even at its very worst, this island is still one of the most wildly beautiful places I know. And some of the strikes you take around the island are pretty wild too. We were running home from the weather with a spread of Kona heads out when the ocean opened up and something solid tried to put the brakes on the boat. When the fish went deep and hung tough enough to make us bring the boat back to him, we thought we might be dealing with the sort of king that can make a whole trip worthwhile. And when we first saw colour, that big white flash had us reaching for the record book. But at Rord Howe, you need to throw the rule book away. What I had was a bronze whaler, quick enough and mean enough to take a surface lure being trolled at 12 knots. Just a few days later, the same performance was repeated when another whaler of similar size blasted a surface lure designed for much faster fish. Good fishing available right along the shoreline, and the kind of fishing you dream about starting just a couple of miles offshore over acres of deep water shelf country. That's what we had right here. Yet it's still in the nature of fishermen to have to wonder about another place just because it's harder to get to. With plenty of high wind and bad weather around, Elizabeth Reef, 100 miles north of Rord Howe, is about as tough a spot as you could want to try and get to. But you know what they say about people wanting to get to places just because they're there. Philip Whistler, owner of Santara, has arrived on the island, and he's hot to trot for Elizabeth. "100 miles is a lot of rough water to have to deal with, and in a head sea, it's 10 hours worth if you travel with respect for your body. Santara carries the sort of electronics that take a lot of the pain out of long hauls, and all the guesswork out of finding a coral donut in the middle of the Pacific. Sat-nav and autopilot take over, and once that's set, sleeping is the best way to pass the time and keep your mind off the way your stomach feels. "10 hours later, the reef is on radar, and it's not long before we get our first look at it. It's not much to look at, and the only thing standing above waterline is the wreck of this Japanese longliner. Steve has trolled this lure across 100 miles of open sea without a strike, but the minute we get near the reef, it finds a taker. It's a good omen, a sign of things to come. No sooner has the anchor hit the bottom than the first lures are in the water, and a bite that will run solid for 3 days and nights is underway.
What you got there, Steve? Trevally, I think.
What happened to you? I thought you were in all that. I thought you were in all that. First thing next morning, it's trevally and wheatbix. The bite that had raged all night, like the wind, seemed to get stronger with the coming of morning. The water was loaded up with these big trevally. Every fish hooked would bring a gang more in with him, and we soon had a regular trevally farm building up right under the boat. After months of Sydney standard fishing, we had a lot of frustration to work off before we could settle down to bigger and better things. And these hot fish were certainly burning off a lot of stored up adrenaline. Pound for pound, these trevally were superb fighters, and some of the string being peeled here ran to 12 pound. Some pretty expensive lures got tossed at those fish at first, but after half a dozen or so made it right out to the reef and took the lures home for souvenirs, we got down to less sophisticated offerings, then even less sophisticated again. But you can't go on fishing trevally forever, and out on the open sea, the hookups were coming just as thick and fast, but the fish were in a much bigger league. A double yellowfin hookup, and the fish in the school are widely varied in size.
Oh, you've still got a lure there. Come under me, mate. Come under. Come under me. Under. There's some boil on. Yeah. You're over again.
When Philip talks about fighting fish, the accent is on fight. He pushes everything to the limit, including himself. Something has to give, either the fish or the tackle. One day, on a big enough fish, it may even be Philip himself. The more it hurts, the more Phil likes it. Before this trip is over, he will get a real big hurt. A hurt so big, he'll smile about it for weeks. To make things interesting, we'd keep the boat running after the first strike, always looking for the double hookup. It works well for small fish, but it gives a big fish a heck of a start. Philip is in his element.
crash it? Hey, sorry, had some nice colours that night, didn't he? Back up! Boy, oh! How much drink you got? Going down, going down. Shit. Yeah. I started accelerating away from it.
After the hiding we'd taken from rough seas the day before, we soon headed back into the shelter of the reef and found ourselves in kingfish country. Just check the size of the pusher this little fellow scoffed off the surface, and hark back to the earlier comment about big baits in this area. There seems to be no such thing as a bait or lure too big for these waters. Rod Harrison is a man who knows how to talk to a solid king, and he sure has the wood right on this one.
Not enough string on this.